investors seem to be making some assumptions about how this is going to turn out. What do you think about those assumptions? Are they premature?
Well, I think for the near term, for investors who are thinking of the next 3 months, it's understandable that the stock is down like it is because this is going to obviously weigh on some investors' decision. And unfortunately, it probably will take longer than 3 months. This may likely go on for a year. I think the bigger picture, and I think what investors need to really get their heads around, is a situation where Elon is still part of the company, still is an employee of Tesla, a visionary role, and maybe him not being as an officer, CEO, or director of the board. I actually think that that would be a positive because I think that there needs to be some structural changes, something that we've been advocating for the last couple months. But ultimately, it's understandable that the stock is where it is. We're still believers here that Tesla will survive, that the company is making progress on its fundamentals, which we're going to hear more about on next Monday as they talk about their production report. And I think that that will probably shift at least the focus for the near term back to the fundamentals.
Teresa, let me ask you, you were an attorney in the SEC's General Counsel office. What do you make of these reports of a close settlement between Tesla and the SEC, where Tesla would have to agree to some provisions and Elon would have to give up the chairmanship, and then according to these reports, Tesla pulled out of that agreement? What does that tell you?
Well, the fact that he pulled out of the agreement, it looked like actually a pretty good deal for him given the SEC's complaint. I think the SEC's complaint is very well drafted. It's very, very clean and clear case of fraud. And it actually is drafted pretty well as a foundation for a criminal indictment. So I think the fact that he pulled out of this, it seems like it was probably something he should have taken.
Well, let's look at that more closely. What would the implications be of a criminal indictment, and why do you see kind of the outlines or the shadow of a criminal charge in what the SEC filed yesterday?
Well, the SEC's complaint is very clear that there were numerous violations of purposefully omitting information, materially misleading statements to investors, and that he willfully did it. And a willful violation of the securities laws is actually a criminal violation. I also found it interesting that they filed this in the Southern District of New York. The investigation was reported to be ongoing in California in the San Francisco office, but the action was actually brought in New York, which is a much more preferred forum for securities fraud cases. And it also works in tandem oftentimes with the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office and bringing the companion criminal cases. And of course there, the Deputy Assistant U.S. Attorney is former SEC Director of Enforcement Rob Khuzami. So there's some indications here that with the ongoing criminal investigation, oftentimes when the criminal investigation begins, as we've heard the inquiry has, that's because the SEC has found a reasonable basis that criminal activity could have occurred, and then they go ahead and pass that information on to the DOJ. And this way in which the SEC formed and drafted its complaint is a very good foundation for a criminal indictment in setting forth all of the elements.
Gene, considering the scenario that Teresa is outlining here, do we have to consider the possibility of a Tesla without Elon Musk? And what does that look like for the company?
Well, we need to consider it, but I think it's a very small probability. I'd be curious in Teresa's perspective that I haven't heard, there's the criminal side of this, but as far as removing him from Tesla altogether, that doesn't seem to be front and center here. Removing his officership and some sort of director role is part of it. But so to answer your question, Brad, is I don't think my perspective is investors should not be worried that Elon is going to be removed entirely from the company. I think that they should be making the safe bet that he will not hold any, and we're putting the odds of this at 50-50. There's still a lot of litigation to go through here, but we're saying kind of a 50-50 that he retains his CEO. Again, I think that that's actually best for the company. So when you put all this together, I don't think that the Tesla story, as bad as all of this sounds, and I think he should pay a big fine for what he has done, but as bad as all this sounds, I don't think it materially changes the long-term trajectory of Tesla.
Teresa, are there any precedents that you know of that we can look at as a guide to how this might be resolved?
Well, we can look back. People have been talking about Martha Stewart. They've been talking about the Theranos and the fact that there are officer and director bars that go forward. It's more unusual to have a permanent officer and director bar, which is what the SEC appears to be going for here. But I think we can look to that to see that it doesn't matter whether somebody is a celebrity, how innovative their technology may seem, or anything, that once you partake in this kind of conduct that the SEC sees as egregious, it is going to seek to remove you as a director or officer of any public company, and that's for the protection of the shareholders, and that's for the protection of the market.
Let me jump in for a second. A question for
Gene.
Teresa is protection, and when you talk about protection of the shareholders, do you think shareholders are better off, shareholders of Tesla are better off if Elon Musk is completely removed from the company?
I think that Tesla would have a very difficult time having its founder and visionary removed from the company. But that is also a separate analysis from the legal implications when somebody breaks the law and the protection to the market and those investors when somebody doesn't take their duties and obligations as a public company CEO the way that they should, and they don't fulfill those obligations. So whether or not he is capable or he will fulfill those obligations that enable him to be a public officer is something separate than whether the company, in its strategic and going forward business sense, whether or not he would be good for it in that way. So there's two separate different analyses going on here, but you can't just break the law and think that because you're a very smart businessman and you're very innovative that the law doesn't apply to you.